very clear. You know, it's 99.99% certain that humans are influencing the climate. But still, they make the story appear much less certain than it is, and therefore, why should we take actions as long as it's uncertain?
We're talking to Dr. James Hansen, who is heading up the NASA's Goddard Institute. He has for 25 years. And when we come back, we will also be joined by Mark Bowen, who's written a book about James Hansen called Censoring Science. Stay with us.
Hey, they're doing really good and strong. All day long. Did you get your kicks knocking down a wall you wouldn't say? Do you find yourself trying to figure out why you ever came? Did you find your heart in all the danger, death, and pain? Or are you just the same? And nice young man, do you feel lost between the haves and the have-nots? You turn your back on all you got, it's hard to say. When you see the mystery that it brought a bit too late. No toxic water gonna wash your life away. Look the other way.
Just can't say. Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We're broadcasting on over 650 stations, on Pacifica and NPR stations, on low-power FM college and community radio stations, on public access TV and PBS TV stations in both TV satellite networks, on Dish Network Channel 9415 Free Speech TV, 9410 Link TV, and on DirecTV Channel 375. And we're video and audio podcasting at democracynow.org. And our headlines are available in Spanish for any radio station to take, as over 150 are. They're also there in transcript form for anyone to read, as are all of our broadcasts. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We're talking about censoring science inside the political attack on Dr. James Hansen and the truth of global warming. Our guests are Dr. James Hansen himself. For the past 25 years, he's headed NASA's Goddard Institute. We are also joined by Mark Bowen, who wrote Censoring Science. Mark, well, thank you very much for joining us from Massachusetts. Why did you choose to take this on as the topic of your book?
Well, actually, I was going to write I was hoping to write a book about Jim anyway, back in 2005. Back in the fall of 2005, I was actually talking to an editor about doing that. And because he's been the person who has explained why the climate is changing now for about 30 years. He played a big role in the first book I wrote, called Thin Ice. And so I was just kind of amazed when all of a sudden he made the headlines there in the New York Times at the end of January 2006. And I actually waited about a month because of a funny kind of arrangement I had with my editor where he was supposed to contact Jim first. But then at the end of February, I called Jim and sent him an email, and he responded within, it turns out, about 20 minutes and said, sure, let's do it. And so I've been trying to keep up with him basically now for about 2 years as I tried to write this book, as he continued to just move along at this breakneck pace, you see.
And in your book, you talk quite a bit about what was going on in the Bush administration in reaction to Dr. Hansen's statements and viewpoints. And in some of the clips that we ran, people kept referring to this young pipsqueak or this political appointee. Talk about Michael Deutsch, the young man right out of college, and his efforts to muzzle Dr. Hansen.
Okay, his name is George Deutsch.
I'm sorry, George Deutsch, yes.
He was a 24-year-old political appointee. He was in an unusually senior position for a person of his experience or lack of experience. He had come straight from the Bush-Cheney war room for the re-election campaign. As it turned out, he had neglected to graduate from college, although he had put that on his resume. And according to the person who hired him for this post, he told her also that he had graduated from college point blank. But it's not really true to say that he was the person who squelched Jim Hansen. He was acting clearly on orders from the top two, or at least the second in command of public affairs at NASA at the time, a fellow named Dean Acosta, who was the assistant, I don't know, they have complicated names, deputy assistant administrator for public affairs. And Mr. Acosta was working in concert with people from the Council on Environmental Quality and the Office of Science and Technology Policy within the White House. The way that it played out, because they were so cunning about doing it, was that all the standard media outlets could pin it on was this young man. The New York Times, for instance, left it at that. And so in my book, I go into fairly complete detail about exactly what was going on, because they were very consciously not leaving a paper trail, telling people not to send emails on this issue, and trying to keep it all. They would hold meetings where there would be generally 2 senior political appointees and 1 career NASA person. So there would be no witnesses at the NASA person's level. And then that person will be told not to put anything in writing and not to send emails about it, only to communicate by telephone and voice or in meetings. But this George Deutsch, unfortunately, he was kind of young and inexperienced, and he did leave an email trail. And that was part of the reason that the New York Times even printed the story, was because there was at least some evidence of a documentary sort.
So here was this young...
It's not true that it was just George Deutsch doing it.
Here was this young man, George Deutsch, who you had to go through. You had to get approval to do your interviews with the public, with reporters. Is that right, Dr. Hansen?
Well, yeah. After my talk at AGU, I was told that I had to have prior approval to speak to the media. And for a few days, I followed that procedure, and they did disallow me to speak to National Public Radio, for example, and they sent a substitute instead of me. And then NPR decided they didn't want to do the interview. And there were a couple of other cases like that. But then I decided I wasn't going to let this continue in the long run, and so that was when I contacted other media, and Andy Revkin wrote an article for the New York Times.
Well, Dr. Hansen, last year you testified at a hearing of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Also called to testify was James Connaughton, the chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality. This is some of what Connaughton had to say.
Well, I want to start, as I indicated, of having the highest personal regard and professional regard for Dr. Hansen and his work. My son and I were just watching him on TV last night on the History Channel. Congressmen, senior administration officials, highly accomplished senior scientists, we all chafe at having to talk to our public affairs people. But the public affairs people are there for a reason. They're there to organize and be sure that what we are saying is official government policy, is understood, and that the people who might have to then respond to those statements can effectively do so. I mean, this is a process that's been with us for a long, long time, and it works well. Now, we all chafe from it. I can understand Dr. Hansen, especially chafing if it comes from someone relatively young and inexperienced, but the policy of public affairs is a very important one. Now, I would note that I am not aware of any instance where any scientist in pursuing their science, of any scientist in seeking peer review of their science, it was in any way controlled, handled, or otherwise managed in their scientific work. I mean, from what I see all over the world, and when people come to me, scientists come and speak their mind. To me, they come and speak their mind to you. What we're talking about is the science policy interface, and that has significant implications that require some level of management.
Prior to his confirmation as chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality, Connaughton worked as a lobbyist for the mining, chemical, and utilities industries. Dr. James Hansen, respond to what he has to say.
Well, the point is that scientists should be able to give the results of their science, and this, both in the case of testimony to Congress and in science that is presented to the public through the media. It makes no sense that it should be censored by the White House before the scientist is able to speak? I mean, what is the rationale by which the White House can review and change testimony to Congress before it's given? I mean, there's no rationale, and our democracy assumes that the public and Congress is well informed. The story that I was told when I was asked, why do I have to have my testimony